everyone, my name is Dee, and I'm on the Vancouver Startup Week team. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are grateful to be virtually gathered on Indigenous land, regardless of where you are joining us from. I'm grateful to be on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish peoples. I'm privileged to live, work, and play on these lands. First of all, I would like to thank you for joining us for VSW 2021 and welcome to How the Web Evolved and Why Video Matters More Than Ever, hosted by Lumen5. This session is part of the VSW Growth Track and is proudly supported by Innovate BC. Innovate BC is a crown agency that provides small businesses around the province with funding, business coaching, and educational content. They are helping entrepreneurs and founders start and scale their business and adapt to the changes brought on by COVID-19. So if you're looking for support for your business, make sure to stop by their booth to learn more about how they can help. And if you have any questions for our speaker, Michael, please post them in the Q&A on the Hubspot session. You can also upvote questions posted by other attendees. And I'll now pass the mic over to Michael, and we'll begin the session.
Great. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for taking the time out of your day to check out Vancouver Startup Week and everything that we are covering today. Very honored to welcome you into my room here. It's not often, usually I do this in person and on stage, and it's always really nice to provide a more intimate setting for this type of conversation. So today I want to go over a lot of what I've been observing over the past maybe 5 or even 8 years of how the web changed, and I'll go into a little bit of how that might impact your work and how you view brand and marketing and go-to-market strategies over the next decade. So with that said, I want to dive straight into it. The topic of this presentation is how the web evolved and how I've watched it evolve over time, and why I've seen the role of video really change over the past decade. And specifically for the purposes of Vancouver Startup Week, I want to talk about how startups can leverage the fall of search and the blog and the open web as we know it, and how startups and small businesses can leverage the rise of social and video and really capture a lot of the new opportunities that are emerging as we speak. All right. So brief introductions. My name is Michael Chang. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Lumen5. But really far before Lumen5, I've been building businesses for 13 years. It's really since 2008 was when I joined the world of entrepreneurship. Prior to Lumen5, I built a company called Sniply, which we grew to about 500,000 users. At that time was a link management content curation platform. And we managed over 85 million links when we were acquired. And that created space for me to build Lumen5, which to date is about 800,000 users now, and over 3.2 million videos have been created on our video creation solution. And so I want to talk a bit about today, over the past 8 to 13 years, what I've seen in the market, how I've responded to some of those changes and some of those trends that you should be looking out for. I want to separate this talk into really 3 major sections. First and foremost is the year 2000 to 2010, and it's this rise of search and the blog and how it shaped much of what we see as online marketing today. But a lot of things really shifted between 2010 and 2020, so the past decade. And this growth of social media created a number of different questions. This growth of video created a sense of urgency, and I want to really dissect and deconstruct what we should be paying attention to and how it impacts every business really. And then I want to round it off at the end with talking about the next decade, 2020 to 2030. What should we be looking out for? What are those things that are much more relevant now than they were ever before? So let's get into it. I want to start off with a quick story. This is one of my favorite pieces, J&J 1888. And this is a screenshot here of the modern methods of antiseptic wound treatments. And I love this example because it's one of the early cool examples of a brand that we recognize of content marketing and thought leadership. And at that time, back in 1888, J&J had this idea of publishing this printed pamphlet that talks about the modern methods of antiseptic wound treatment. And the way they marketed their products was to create these kinds of content marketing, if you will, thought leadership pieces, and they distribute these print copies at the time to pharmacists and surgeons, and it educated them on this idea that, oh, you should be washing your hands in between surgeries. Who knew, right? And they circulated these printed pamphlets that were massively successful. And of course, the goal of content marketing, the goal of thought leadership is that when people understand the modern methods of antiseptic wound treatment and they see that, oh, I should go buy alcoholic wipes or hand wash or soaps. Of course, J&J is the provider that sells these products that the content marketing is advocating for. So this is one of the early examples, and content marketing and thought leadership hasn't really changed that much, but the way in which we deliver this content certainly has changed a lot. Ultimately, what it comes down to is a thought leader is recognized by peers, customers, and industry experts as someone who deeply understands the business they're in, the needs of their customers, and the broader marketplace in which they operate. They have distinctively original ideas, unique points of view, and new insights. And that's relevant for really every business. And it's always been relevant ever since the dawn of business to now. And thought leadership is just one of those ways in which we establish trust and authority and awareness among our customer base. So that leads me into the first section of the talk. This year 2000 and 2010 was where search solidified its role into the internet, but also by extension, growth and marketing and brand awareness. And a lot of things really, really were constructed at that time. And I think it's really important to understand where we've come from in order to understand where we are now and where we're going. So I'll briefly touch on the kind of 2000 to 2010. As you'll recall, these somewhat historic events, the launch of Google, becoming the largest search engine, going public, and so forth. And the birth of Google really shaped our interaction, our relationship with information, and our relationship with the internet. It created this idea where you want to know something, you want to acquire some sort of knowledge, you go into a search engine, you look for it to find the answers. And that infrastructure created much of how we view marketing today. The website, as a result of that ecosystem, became the hub of marketing. The blog became the hub of thought leadership. Given that the blog is the most dynamic component of your websites, a lot of times when we as brands publish industry reports or expertise, we do it through the blog. And on the right-hand side, you'll kind of see the diagram I've constructed here, where most of us view our companies, our brands, and our products with the website at its core, and everything kind of ties back to it. And that was largely due to the way in which Google had influenced the web at that time. But therein lies certain challenges. Given that the search engine only has a single first page, nobody really digs through the second page of Google, as we all know. There's a very high barrier to entry in search. And for example, HubSpot really owns the inbound marketing term. If you wanted to target the inbound marketing keyword, you're going to have a really hard time doing so. These are somewhat gated barriers, and HubSpot really has so many of these keywords locked down. So how can we as startups and early businesses compete in a world of search where so much of the incumbents dominate the major keywords? So hopefully we'll answer some of those questions throughout the talk, but wanted to put that out there. But of course, the reign of search kind of shifted towards the end of the 2010s. Or the end of the 2000s with the launch of thefacebook.com, with Jack Dorsey showcasing Twitter at South by Southwest, with Steve Jobs unveiling the iPhone at Macworld. The dynamics of the internet really started to shift, and the turn of the decade in 2010 was when major changes started happening. And that was marked by Instagram launch, for the first time, a major social network that was really a mobile-only experience. It wasn't really desktop friendly. It still isn't desktop friendly. And that takes us to the 2010s to 2020s. And this was really a time where many of us were considering a shift in strategy. Many of us were considering, what do we do in response to this change? Is search still relevant? Is the blog still the main method of driving content marketing? And a number of different things happened during this decade that I think dictates what we should think about in the next decade, and how we should think about brand and growth strategies. One of the things I want to point out here is an inflection point really happened around 2014. And that inflection point was daily time spent by device. Not only was our relationship with the internet changing, the primary device through which we access the internet, which at that time was a desktop computer, rapidly shifted to mobile, which in many ways, since the launch of the iPhone, has become a personal computing device more than it is a phone as we used to understand it. And this drastically changed many things. It changed the context through which we interact with relationship. Instead of sitting down and consuming information with a keyboard and a mouse, it rapidly shifted to on the go. It's on the bus. It's while we're walking around to different places. So our relationship with information changed. Our brand discovery process changed. Our purchasing decisions changed. And really, again, our relationship with information as a whole changed. And that inflection point happened around 2014. And a couple of things accompany those changes. If you look back at 1990s, you'll notice that cell phones had screens, yes, but the screens at that time were primarily for showcasing very basic information, maybe the numbers that you've dialed, maybe if you had a missed call or something like that. And it wasn't until the creation of what we consider now smartphones that the role of the screen became much larger when it comes to our portal into the internet. And nowadays, you'll see that there are flip phones, there are foldable phones, and phones are just getting more. Most of them are basically just one big screen. The screens that we're accessing the internet through is becoming much more high definition than ever before, and for the first time, data plans are more affordable than ever before, allowing us to stream HD videos. And so our access to information, our access to this type of visual content has changed, and we're now able to access information in a way that we couldn't before. And a lot of these things created the fundamental shifts for how information is being communicated today and why it matters in the world of marketing and branding. Um, and I want to introduce you to a framework here. If you haven't seen this before, it's a media richness framework. And media richness or information richness is sometimes defined as the ability to change understanding within a time interval. And that's what sales and marketing and branding really is. As marketers, we're looking to change understanding within a time interval, whether it's to persuade a user that there's a problem or to introduce them to our solution. Media richness is this idea that throughout history, we've always seen this gravitation towards rich media content. So, for example, if I were to introduce a concept to you and all I showed you were photographs or paintings, it's relatively ineffective, it's relatively abstract. And that's why in marketing, we often rely on text. And that's where you have documents, emails, white papers, blog posts. But then moving to the next step, you've got slightly richer media, such as Clubhouse and podcasts. And these are these audio approach to communication. And then you have all the way to video, of course, Zoom, you've got video content, and of course, nothing beats face-to-face. And that's why product demos and sales continues to be conducted on a face-to-face basis. Media-rich communication is still the most effective form of communication. And we've seen this evolution, this gravitation towards rich media time and time again, all the way from cave paintings to the printed press, to the radio, to television as we once knew it. And this is the same evolution that we're seeing on the internet. The internet began as a very image and text focus with simple JPEG and mostly words. And as it evolved to richer media, we had podcasts and we were able to listen to things on the internet. And now really what we're seeing is this explosion of video content. The technology, both hardware and software, has allowed for this to happen. So this gravitation towards rich media isn't new. It's just something that's finally happening on the internet. And these major shifts on the web and communications in general do take decades to really solidify. Another expression of this inevitable gravitation towards from words into imagery you'll see is the activities across the web and the social networks that have emerged and the apps that have emerged over the past decade. And you'll start to see that at the turn of the decade in 2010, you started to see the Instagrams and the Pinterests, where it was not about text, it wasn't about links, it was much more so about imagery and visuals. And then with Snapchat, you've got ephemeral video content that you post a video and it kind of disappears after 24 hours, which went on to inspire Instagram stories and many other similar types of formats. You've got lots of interesting things happening along the way, acquisitions of LinkedIn, and now LinkedIn embracing video in a way that they haven't before. And then, of course, TikTok arriving on the scene, which is, again, very, very much a visual communication platform. Twitter, YouTube, everything gravitates towards this video and imagery version of the web. And one thing to take note of is as we're building our startups and building our brands, we have to challenge ourselves. Are we building our content and brand strategy still based on words? Do we have a content marketing strategy that's heavily invested in search and the blog? And is that still relevant? And with so many of the incumbents having things like first page of Google on many many of the major keywords locked down, it's really beneficial for startups to think about, well, if we were to reach a video brand or imagery brand in advance to the incumbents, where do we compete and how do we compete? And can we claim territory before the incumbents arrive? So it's important to acknowledge these trends and see the trajectory, because the understanding of these trends is what allows us to arrive at that point, at the future, before the incumbents and our competitors do. Another way of viewing this inevitable shift is YouTube is now the second largest search engine on the internet, with more than 3 billion searches a month. It's bigger than Bing, Yahoo, Ask, and AOL combined. So it's not that Google is becoming obsolete. Even Google has seen this trend and diversified away from their traditional text search approach into YouTube. And very early on, they saw that video content, if you are to learn something, and that's what search is. You're looking to learn something, you're looking for answers to a question, and you can receive that in a web page format or in a text format, or you can receive that education in a video format. And increasingly, learning through video, making purchasing decisions instructed by video, that is a major trend that continues to grow as the open web becomes slightly less relevant every single year than we knew previously. And it also comes down to the mobile experience too, is if you're on a mobile phone, it is fundamentally not optimized for a lot of reading or a lot of scrolling on this tiny text with small screens. Whereas apps like YouTube are fully optimized for the full screen experience. You've got audio, you've got that face-to-face interaction as well. So this kind of shift towards imagery is not just Google becoming obsolete. It's also Google itself evolving into a web of visuals. Another thing I want to point out is many of these trends are not purely organic. They are decisions made by owners of these platforms. Here's a quote from Mark Zuckerberg as early as 2018 on an earnings call. He said, "I see video as a mega trend. That's why I'm going to keep putting video first across our family of apps." And he's certainly done that. And you'll see that many of the apps that you interact with today, if you go on Facebook, you go on WhatsApp even, there's a heavy emphasis on video content, and that is purely by design. And so you can start to see the evolution of Facebook from words to video as well. On the left-hand side, you'll see one of the more classic views of Facebook. It was very much built around the walls, people's walls and comments, and they were mostly text with images involved. But nowadays, you look at Facebook, it's heavily, heavily emphasized on visuals. There's a Facebook Watch tab for you to just watch videos. There is a heavy emphasis on stories, which are mostly video content, and the feed is much wider and larger. And on a mobile phone, it looks very vibrant. So Facebook itself has seen this trend and has evolved its platform to be much more visual and imagery focused. And so one thing to consider as we are thinking about our businesses and our brands is, are we still stuck in this words approach to content marketing and our relationship with our customers, or have we evolved our marketing into a much more visual approach? Because that's what's going to define success moving forward. And really, the crux of the situation and what we as brand builders and startup builders and marketers have found ourselves in is we're caught in between this $1 trillion fight for attention. And what that means is ecosystems are closing up. You've got news feeds that are prioritizing posts that are natively social, where once it was fine to have your marketing hub focused on your website, and you would see social media as a distribution channel. You might create let's say you write a blog post, you share a link on social, and you expect people to click on that link and visit your website. And that used to be fine before. But as this fight for attention evolves, platforms like Facebook are discouraging people from leaving the social network. So if your whole brand is to post links that take people away from the social network, that is acting against the interests of the social network. And they do a lot of neat little tricks to prevent and discourage users from doing that. And one of the ways they do that is to prioritize native posts, types of content that actually keep people on the social network as opposed to leaving it. And as a result, you'll see many of the stats come through. Video posts get 3 times more engagement than image, text, and link posts. And one of the reasons for that is video is a really powerful tool to keep eyeballs. It keeps people on Facebook. When you scroll through and you see a video, it auto plays, it hooks you in, it stops your scroll, it captures your attention for the 30-second or 1 minute, whatever duration it is. And it's very beneficial for Facebook to have content that keeps users on that platform, as opposed to a link post that takes them away from the social network. So you'll start to see newsfeed algorithms prioritize video content. And putting into context, if you've got 2 brands that are competing, one that's posting exclusively links that draw them away from social networks onto their own websites, and you've got a brand that posts native video content that keeps people on the platform, you're going to see newsfeed algorithms prioritize the second brand because of the lenience towards native content. So those are things to think about because these are changing dynamics that are deliberate decisions by owners of any of these different platforms to compete with one another. And as a result, on the third point here, you'll start to see that businesses are relocating their brand hub, their hub of commerce, from their own domain, from their own website onto social profiles. And if you're looking for examples, look no further than some of the newer small businesses that are emerging, like hairstylists, tattoo artists, these kinds of service providers, and in many ways restaurants as well, are bypassing the website. They don't build their business around the website anymore. Their business is fundamentally built around their social profile, and that's where they communicate and distribute content and draw awareness. And if you're looking to work with them as a business, you message them directly on the social platform. So we're seeing this evolution where businesses are relocating their brand hub away from websites directly onto social profiles. And businesses who do that have an advantage of reach and engagement on the social platforms compared to businesses that are still building their brand out of social. And so you start to see this separation. But easier said than done. I think having a presence on social, a meaningful presence on social, is more difficult than ever before because it's not just Facebook. It's a plethora of these different social networks: Facebook, YouTube, WhatsApp, Instagram, WeChat, TikTok, and the list goes on. And the fragmentation component has really it's a double-edged sword. I think first and foremost, it makes it difficult to have a meaningful presence across such a wide variety of social networks. But on the flip side, it's also a competitive advantage because no brand can be in all of these social platforms. It gives startups and small businesses an opportunity to go where the incumbents aren't and serve the underserved market. So let's say you have a big competitor who's very strong on Facebook, but is not yet on TikTok. Well, there is an opportunity. And that's how small companies and startups can leverage fragmentation to their advantage. But I want to put this graph out there just to showcase how fragmented the web has become. And we're in a very different place than we were, let's say, in 2000 and 2010, where Google was one of the singular portals into the web. Nowadays, the portal into the web is vast and varied. Not only that, each platform is also becoming much more vast and varied. So when Instagram first was introduced, all you had to think about was these square Instagram posts. Nowadays, there are Instagram posts, stories, IGTV, Instagram Reels, there are collections, there are all sorts of stuff, Instagram Live. And when you are thinking about an Instagram strategy, it's now more than just the Instagram feed strategy. Is if you want to have a meaningful presence on Instagram and really leverage all of the opportunities that it brings and build a brand on there, you have to leverage all of these different types of Instagram posts. And that complexity is not unique to Instagram. LinkedIn also has LinkedIn stories. It's got LinkedIn articles, LinkedIn cover videos, and even Google more recently has introduced Google stories. And so it's important to think about each of these social networks as complete ecosystems in and of itself, with multiple formats there within. And in order to have a meaningful presence in any of these social networks, you really have to utilize more than just their posts or their most basic functions. Another message that we're all probably familiar with on the right here is this merger of social networks and instant messaging. And we've all kind of seen this with Facebook's acquisition of WhatsApp and spinning out Messenger from Facebook, that this was somewhat inevitable. And this speaks to that ecosystem of apps and ecosystems closing up as communications and social media are binded into the same hub. Companies like Facebook, these kind of big social media corporations, are really encouraging interaction within their ecosystems. They're trying to prevent you from, let's say, using email on an open web domain on your own website or contact form. They're really encouraging these things to be done on their platform. And there's advantages to playing by their rules. You get priority, you get more exposure, you get favored by their algorithms. And so there's a double-edged sword to be noted there. I want to point out an example. I think China is always a great example of what a mobile-first economy looks like. We're seeing this trajectory where we're moving away from the open web connected by search into an ecosystem of apps. And that mostly has happened in China. And here's just an example of how all of the apps and the features play into one another. And it's not It's not the web as we know it in North America, but it's very well where the trajectory could be headed. And a good example is, if you even look back to 10 years ago, a Chinese business might not think of getting a website at all. Why build a website when most business is conducted within the WeChat ecosystem? And it makes much more sense to build the hub of your brand and commerce on to the WeChat ecosystem as opposed to building it on your own domain, expecting it to be connected in an open web through search. So if the trajectory we're looking at is true and Facebook's working towards this closed ecosystem as China has seen WeChat done, then we as startups and small businesses have to think about, well, how do we structure our commerce? How do we structure our hub of brand? Do we want to build it natively on social and gather the benefits that it comes with? Or do we still want to stick to building our own domain and our own presence outside of the ecosystems? And there's pros and cons to both of those things. All right, so I've talked a bunch about the trends and the foundation of what's happening and why it's happening, and now I want to get a bit more concrete and talk a bit about, well, how do you actually win in this new world? If the native language of the web is video and commerce is happening on social, what can we do to win against incumbents and competitors in this new decade and these changing dynamics? And I want to summarize the challenges really into three major points. Reliance on search is on a downtrend. That's one of the major ways in which the web has evolved. Search used to be everything. And if you were not appearing on search results, it was very difficult for customers to find you. But nowadays, search is less relevant than it ever has been. People go on social, they're intercepted, their intentions are intercepted by proactive content. And what we need to think about there as you're building your brands is consider a social first brand strategy. What does it look like if the presence of your brand is first and foremost on social and not on your own domain, where we tend to spend a lot of our time and energy? Point number two, people are expecting engaging content. And this goes back to the preference for rich media. It's just not enough these days to publish blog posts or write about your business or write about your solution. Just keep in mind that our relationship with the internet has changed from desktop, keyboard, mice to really these small supercomputers that live in our pockets. It's visual. These screens are vibrant. And for that, we have to think about, well, what does a video first content strategy look like? And then last but not least, the web is more fragmented than ever before. It's not like we have the one Google that connects everything or the one Facebook that connects everything. Competition in the free market has made it so that there's Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, TikTok, Snapchat. And more important than ever before, we have to think about how to have a meaningful presence across multiple channels. And a lot of that is learning how to build a team and think about repurposing content across these various channels. We have our key messages and core value propositions that we want to communicate to the market. And it's the same stories that we have to tell in a slightly different way across these different platforms, and understanding them is the first step. So I think these are the three major challenges. If you can address these three major challenges, you can put your own brand, your own startup in a really competitive position to get ahead of the incumbents and many of the competitors, because I think many businesses around the world still haven't figured this stuff out yet. I also want to boil it down to two major balancing factors. It is quality and quantity of content that you put out there, and the presence that your brand has. First and foremost, quality, with engagement being influenced by richness of information. Video content is oftentimes what is defined as quality. If you just have written content out there and links that take people places with load times in between, that is not quality content. And I also want to challenge that we reconsider what we traditionally think of as quality. On the social web, quality of content is not about production value. It's not about having the best lighting. It's not about having the best sound. Really, it's about the substance, the meat of the content. So what I would focus on when it comes to quality of content is really focus on delivering relevant and valuable insights. Don't worry so much about the production quality. Focus on the quality of the message. Is this content actually valuable? Does it actually make people walk away feeling like they've learned something? If yes, then that is good content. On the flip side, quantity is equally as important on the social web. Keep in mind that unlike search is very permanent. The front page of Google on a given keyword is mostly similar across time, but social is highly ephemeral. Content has to be fresh, frequent, and consistent. When you're posting on social, it mostly disappears and loses relevance within a matter of days, sometimes even weeks or hours, depending on the platform that you're working with. And to be able to keep up with the quantity needs, you do have to think about content strategy and brand strategy in a very different way. It's publishing publishing consistent content daily or at least once a week. And that content needs to be adapted and repurposed to work with each channel in different formats. Another common factor that I hear is, oh, well, how are we to, especially for companies that have an established written content strategy that's targeted for search? I want to dedicate this slide to you. How do we then adapt a new video content strategy that's completely different from what we've had? And my answer to that usually is it's not as different as you think. The way I think about it is the same message, just new delivery. The core message of your brand and your business doesn't change. You still do what you do as a company. Here in the simple infographic, I've shown that, let's say before you would publish a long form blog post where you talk about your industry insights and trends and recommendations. Well, you don't need to turn that into an hour-long film, but consider breaking up each of your list items into a separate video. For example, if you've got this 3 long points here in a blog post that's being represented, maybe create 5 separate videos about the subpoints without it, create a video series. And that's what ephemeral content looks like on social. It's turning one core message into multiple bite-sized video content that you can then publish and say, well, come back tomorrow for part 2, part 3, part 4, part 5. So the way in which we build brand and think about content marketing needs to evolve as the web evolves and as the web changes. Another thing to think about is, this is another common factor that I hear. Oh, how do we build these video content brands and social brands when we don't have video people on the team, or we don't have money to hire an agency? And the challenge I would put there is, stop thinking about content as a specialized skill. I think there was a point in time where video editing really was exclusively done through professionals who've mastered Adobe software, who've gone to school for this type of stuff. But really, we have to start thinking about how to empower every member of our teams to be able to create engaging video content, ourselves included. Whether you're an individual founder that's also running marketing, or you have a small marketing team, it's just not an excuse anymore for someone to say, oh, I don't know how to create video and therefore I'm not going to do it. I think much of this stuff has been made easy through a new generation of user-friendly video creation tools. Lumen5 is one of these tools, but certainly not the only. There's plenty of them out there. And I think the left-hand side is what most of us still see as video editing content. It's this complicated layers software, Adobe After Effects. That's just not what the reality is anymore. Lumen5 and at least a dozen others have taken this approach to build more of a PowerPoint approach to video creation, I would say. And what I would always challenge is, imagine a world without PowerPoints. How much of a headache would it be to create presentations if you didn't have something like PowerPoints? And half the time, getting the job done is about having the right access to technology. And again, I'm not here to sell Lumen5. Lumen5 is one of many options out there that you can start to look into to create video content in more of a slide-based drag and drop approach, where you don't need that video expertise, or you don't need to hire that agency. So having the right technology is obviously part of the solution as well. Towards the tail end of this talk here, I want to make things a bit more specific and be a bit more concrete. So one of the opportunities, one of 3 opportunities I see, is decreasing reliance on search and web. Means that social is the new source of information and knowledge. Whoever your customers may be, as they're looking to make purchasing decisions, as they're looking to learn, they're going on social to do a lot of that learning and absorbing a lot of that information. Front page search results, this kind of SEO approach, is largely secured by most of the people who've already won those segments, the incumbents, companies like Hubspot that have keywords like inbound marketing on lockdown. And so it's not a very healthy place for a startup to compete in. And it's important for us to think about how we diversify away from SEO and blog strategies, which have dominated almost 2 decades now. And the approach there is to be there first and claim your territory, much like how companies like and brands like HubSpot were there before and had years to build their search ranking to secure that position. You also have an opportunity now to leverage the fragmentation of the web and build your presence on emerging social channels. Be adventurous, be bold, go build a presence on these platforms that nobody's really there yet, and learn the unique rules of each network as they evolve, because Facebook is different than Instagram, than Twitter, and than TikTok. Being there first gives you more knowledge to be able to adapt, so that by the time the incumbents arrive, you've already had the channel figured out and you are the incumbent of that channel. So establish yourself before the competition arrives. Here's one example. I go back to the HubSpot example. On the left-hand side, you've got HubSpot on Google, where you search inbound marketing. They have the first result, they have the second results, they have the FAQ result. They really have that front page locked down. But if you search inbound marketing on TikTok, HubSpot has zero presence, but yet you'll still see lots of people talk about inbound marketing on TikTok. And one of the common misconceptions I've heard is that, oh, TikTok is all consumers, it's people dancing and entertaining content. But it's not true. There's lots of business content and a lot of educational content on TikTok, and searching the right hashtags will help you find these things. For example, the screenshot shows when you search inbound marketing, there's all of these different people talking about inbound marketing, none of whom are HubSpot. So if you are competing with HubSpot, you're building a CRM or you're building something around inbound marketing, you're not having success competing with them on search. Well, places like TikTok is a great place to get there before your competitors do. And you're not going to expect the same volume of traffic, especially not at the beginning, but it allows you to secure that emerging traffic so that as it grows, as the platform grows, you already have a solidified place there. Second opportunity I want to talk about, social media is becoming much more fragmented, as we talked about. But one of the trends that ties together all of this fragmentation is that words and links will become increasingly ineffective. Many of the newer social media networks and the updates to existing social networks have all trended towards visual and imagery. Writing words, long words, and posting links that take people off social networks, that's just not going to be an effective strategy moving forward. Driving traffic off of social puts you against the best interests of social networks, which is always kind of an uphill battle if you're trying to do that. And there's more channels and sub-channels than ever before. It's not just about a single strategy for Instagram. It's about understanding the 5 or 6 different ways you can use Instagram. And really, the strategic approach there is similar. It's how are you going to move faster and be everywhere before your bigger competitors who are larger and less nimble? They're going to have a harder time adapting and figuring out these new channels, and that's where your opportunity is going to be. And with that, I would emphasize on focusing on ephemeral bite-sized video contents. I think the web world has really gone from this long form 5,000 6,000 word industry reports, whereas the market and the communication preference is really moving towards these ephemeral bite-sized video content. And what you should aim for is frequent, consistent touch points, as opposed to these one-time permanent placements that live on the front page of the web. And it's developing your key messages and adapting them to each different channel, being mindful that each network is slightly different. And your ability to understand and adapt your messaging is going to ultimately help you win eyeballs on these platforms. Here I want to show an example, homegrown company, Vessi Footwear. I'm sure you've seen some of their waterproof shoes. On the left-hand side, you'll see that Vessi is very active in posting video content on Facebook. Nike and Adidas, mostly in response to their boycotting of Facebook years back, kind of have no presence at all on these platforms. And so it's another story of going where your competitors aren't. And incumbents operate by a different set of rules. And if they're not on Facebook, that's an opportunity for you to capture that audience. And so one way to view it is, who are your big competitors? Who are your incumbents? Where are they and where are they not? And how do we go where they're not? Last but not least, one of the main problems that I think we'll face in the next decade is building trust in an age of misinformation. We do live in an age of fake news and misinformation. There's countless sponsored posts. People doubt content that they see more than ever before, and that translates over to business decisions and purchasing decisions. The new default really is doubt and suspicion. So it's not as easy as it used to be to convince someone of anything. Looking up a provider on social is the new norm, people doing their own research. And really the approach there, the strategic approach there, is that thought leadership is going to be the key to trust, and building trust and authority across a long period of time in particular, not rushing into these relationships. When you're establishing a brand on a social network, think long term. The bite-sized ephemeral content that you drip feed across a long period of time, it's providing insightful and educational content on a daily basis across quarters and sometimes months and years. That's what helps people build trust with your brand, so that when it's time, they know exactly who to turn to. And it's just establishing expertise through frequent insights and education, as opposed to thinking about a flagship video that you produce once every quarter. It's more about that bite-sized approach to building brand. And in this new world of misinformation, quantity becomes just as important as quality. That repetition and reinforcement across a long period of time is what builds recognition and awareness. And those are some things that have drastically changed from before, where the world of search and the web was really about these permanent placements and permanent assets. And being everywhere is tricky and is challenging. And I want to show this infographic in case you haven't dived and explored Instagram in the recent past. When you hit the plus button, you'll see that Instagram asks you, do you want to create a post, a story highlight, IGTV, reel, guide? There's so many different content types. I also want to use another homegrown example to show. If you go to Daily Hive Vancouver, you'll see that they really take advantage of everything. And Daily Hive is a good example of a brand that really embraces Instagram for all it is. They've got posts, they've got guides, reels, IGTV, they've got collections and stories. And if you think your customers are on Instagram, it's time to think about how you can fully embrace the platform for what it is and not use it merely as an extension of your external domain and web. Long story short, how brands are adapting, and we do work with over almost 1 million brands now around the world. And I've seen that really it comes down to four things. They're diversifying thought leadership from their blog and their website to social. They're delivering key insights through video content in a more engaging way than they were previously. They're deploying new tools to enable video creation so that they're not hiring video professionals or paying agencies to do this work. They're really enabling themselves as entrepreneurs and their small teams to be able to create video content to compete with many of the incumbents. And as a result, decentralizing content creation away from bottlenecks so that they can do it once a day or multiple times per day. And if you think this is kind of all very scary, change is all obviously very scary. I think through a startup lens, change is always signal for opportunity. So I think there's a lot to be excited about. But it's not as scary as it seems. What I would recommend is prioritize your social channels, know your audience. You don't have to build meaningful presences across multiple social networks from day zero. Start with the one that you think is most meaningful to your brand. Really focus on creating native video content, not content that's aimed at driving people away from social networks as some sort of second class experience, but think about how do you create content dedicated to that platform and what makes sense for that platform. And then last but not least, like everything else that you do, it's all about tracking the results, running experiments, and then scaling it slowly. Do more of what works, do less of what doesn't work. Okay, that was. I know we covered a lot within a short period of time. Talked about 3 decades of changes on the web within a 40-minute period. But I do want to take a pause here and take a more interactive approach. So if there are any questions, I know we've got a wonderful moderator here who's been keeping an eye on things.
Yeah, we have a few questions from the audience. So the first question is, what about the sentiment that social channels aren't reliable and it's best to build an email list?
Yeah, so it's a very common argument, and again, many of these things are double-edged swords. And there's always a comfort to owning the asset. And I think one of the more common pushbacks for social media in general is you never truly own it. And with that said, search is kind of the same way. You don't own the front page of Google. You can do your best to optimize an SEO and have rankings in those places, but you never truly own it. Google changes their search algorithms just as social media changes their algorithms. And email list really is something that you own and you have control over. But what I would challenge is, do we think that email list is the future? And that's how I always ask brands to think about, well, what do you think happens 10 years from now? And what I've seen is decreasing reliance on email as a means of communication. I think Slack was one of the pivotal points where even internally people use emails less than ever before. Some of the things that I would also think about is phone call and having a list of phone numbers that you can call your clients up used to be a very reliable strategy. And 10 years ago, that might have been a great argument. What about building this phone list? But over time, as technology evolved, I don't remember the last time I was on the phone actually talking to people. Much of that is being replaced by text messages. So as the web evolves into instant messages, into apps like Slack, into social media with a lot of communication built in, the challenge I would put out there is, do you think emails would play a big role in communication 10 years from now? And that's not to say that email and SEO is not effective today. I think it's very well possible that having an email list is still a very effective means of reaching your audience today. But part of diversification and forward looking is to think about, well, what happens when email decreases relevance? When the way in which we communicate and absorb information shifts to things like instant messaging. So I would like to think of it as future proofing the business. And that's not to say that email doesn't work today, but my personal recommendation would be to think a bit about, well, Instead of an email list, what about a social list where you can use instant messaging to reach people? What is the next evolution of email? And I think that's what this whole talk is about: is how do we future proof our brands? How do we get into areas of communication that our incumbents and our competitors aren't there yet? And email list is one of those examples where lots of other brands probably have emails and are sending your target audience emails already. And how do we go where our competitors are not?
Awesome. Thanks for answering that. Another question I got from the audience is, aside from captioning, what do you see as some accessibility considerations that are gaining traction?
Yeah, I think so. The part that I'm less worried about is I think the social networks themselves do a really great job at that. I know it's certainly something I've thought about, and many of our customers think about is how do they build accessibility into their content itself. But what I've found consistently is that accessibility is hugely advantageous for the social networks to figure out, because it allows them to capture an audience and allows them to provide a smooth experience for them. And so you'll notice that across Facebook and YouTube, even that closed captioning is often built straight in, that AI voices it is built straight in. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. I think the social networks currently do a great job at optimizing for accessibility. And the reason I recommend that, especially in the context of Vancouver Startup Week, is with startups within smaller operations, our resources often constrained. So to whatever extent we can leverage the resources of much larger companies like Facebook to do accessibility work for us, that's beneficial for us and allows us to focus on the quality of the contents, and then rely on platforms like Facebook to build accessibility tools. And there's a lot that you can search up out there. Facebook does a lot for accessibility, even in visual recognition. Like if you are a blind person browsing Facebook, Facebook has a really powerful machine learning tool that can actually analyze what the photo is, and it recites it to the user. So Facebook does balance that emphasis on visual and imagery with accessibility concerns as well. So it's not really a top priority, I think, for a startup to consider, given that there are many workable solutions that are provided by the social networks themselves.
I see. And another question I have here is, do you think video conference will be mainstream communication?
So in so many ways, video conferencing, over Zoom was not a new thing. Zoom and like Zoom itself, for example, was a very large company even prior to the pandemic. So I'd say that over time, we've moved increasingly towards video conferencing as a mainstream communications tool because it allows us to form relationships and conduct business cross borders. And that really is the major advantage. Think of how before, if you had to, let's say, sell a customer on a product from Europe, and you've got to put your salesperson on a plane, you got to take out hotels, and then they arrive and there's a whole deal. That just doesn't happen as much anymore. I think if anything, the pandemic accelerated the comforts, and it's converted many of the more traditional businesses who are not used to conducting business over video conferencing. There's a hardware barrier that I think people have to cross in order for video conferencing to be mainstream. It's having access to a good camera, it's having access to a good microphone. And that's the part that's been accelerated this year, is given the lack of choice, many people have taken the step to invest in a microphone and camera and figured out how Zoom works, have it installed on their computers. And now that the hardware and software barriers have been overcame, I think people will default to video conferencing as the mainstream form of communication. I also think video communication is more than just real-time communication. Things like Zoom, even this setting is real-time video communication. But I think asynchronous video communication is going to become larger and larger as well. YouTube is a good example of asynchronous video communication, where you're watching the video of someone talking. They're not necessarily talking to you in real time. And that's the kind of thing that's you see a lot on social media. When people post video content, they're talking to the camera. One of the more common examples that you'll see around the neighborhood are realtors creating video content, maybe talking about housing opportunities and how to prepare your home for sale. And it's asynchronous communication where you can consume that content through a news feed at a different point in time. So I think video conference as a communication tool will become mainstream, both synchronously and asynchronously. I do really very much view that as the future. And the hardware limitations are more than just the webcam and the microphone. It's also in the phones that we have, the power of the cameras, the Bluetooth headphones that we have access to allow for video communication even on the go without a computer, with data plans that now allow us to have real-time conversations in video form in HD using networks like 5G. And those are just forms of communication that wasn't previously possible.
Yeah, for sure. There's been a lot of support for video conferencing and more remote options. Another question I got was, what key metrics are important for videos? And in your opinion, do these metrics vary in importance based on the platform they're on?
Yeah, so I view sharing as a very critical component. There's a number of different metrics. There's likes, there's comments, there's shares. I think the main struggle that people have is it's often difficult to tie a video view directly to a purchase or some sort of reaching out to the business. And I think the challenge I've seen is that is in many ways short term thinking, and it's applying the mental model of the past into a platform of the future. So, for example, in the past, where you would heavily rely on something like a paid ad to a contact form, where you do expect a conversion opportunity to happen, that you buy an ad, they click on the ad, they fill out the contact form, and that's seen as a win, or that's seen as your ROI. I think in the going back to the narrative around a world of misinformation, and building trust in a business relationship takes longer now, and it's this bite-sized, drip-fed relationship that happens across a long period of time. It's more important than ever before that we don't expect these instant point of conversion. That it's not about they watch a video and then they instantly make a purchase. It's more about how do you maintain that relationship across a long period of time. So what I would look for is, can you grow consistency? Is there an individual who watches and likes and comments on your brand's content consistently over a long period of time? Because that's what's going to signal an eventual purchasing decision. It's more about engagement retention than it is about a spike in numbers. Whereas before, you can have a big ad campaign and expect a spike in numbers. Now that the world of commerce is evolving more towards slow relationship building, it's retention of those relationships. And I often look to shares as a great example of that, because I think sharing is the highest showcase of commitments. You can like a post and it's relatively invisible, and you can like a post and they're not putting their credibility behind the content. You can comment on a post, which is a form of interaction, but again, they're not vouching for it. But when someone is sharing the posts, they are putting their reputation on the line. They're backing your content and sharing it with people they care about. So that's what I would track over time as the most important key metric, as a measure of whether you're actually delivering value through your content. Because if it's actual valuable content, people are very likely to share it. People want to be proud of being the content curator for their network. And when they see really impactful, meaningful content and they share that, they have an opportunity to get likes and comments and earn a reputation for themselves. So that's what I would look at, is are you growing the volume of shares over time? And I think that's true in many different networks.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. Then building up of that question, you also mentioned earlier there's a fragmentation of the web. And I'm sure this varies based on the content strategy and brand, but based on the factors of trust and also search, is it generally better to have a few videos on a variety of platforms, or posting consistently on one or two platforms?
Yeah, so that's also a great question as well. I think you know in a startup context, again, in the through the lens of Vancouver Startup Week, startups by definition often have resource constraints. So I don't think it's a good idea to have a non-meaningful presence across many different social platforms. I think it is important to have a presence across many different social platforms, but it's really important to have a truly meaningful presence on one or two major platforms that are most relevant for your business. So step one I would recommend is really understand where your customers are. And it doesn't matter if they're B2B or B2C. Everyone lives on some social network. Everyone relies on some social network for their professional development and learning. And that's where you want to build the truly meaningful part of your brand. So for example, in the example that we gave earlier, if that's Instagram, then it's about figuring out all the different avenues of Instagram. How do you have a consistent Reel strategy, IGTV strategy, story strategy, to be able to make sure all your collections are in place, and guides and new tools as Instagram introduces them. You should still repurpose those content to have a presence on Facebook and LinkedIn and TikTok so that you can start to gather insights, because there might be a social network out there that just has an uptick and you weren't aware that your audience was on there. And by being active on all these social platforms, you can track analytics separately and see, for example, maybe you thought your consumers were on Instagram, but really you're getting the most shares on Facebook. Well, that gives you a signal and data to pivot your most meaningful channel from Instagram to Facebook, and then start thinking about all the things that you can do on Facebook. So, lots of people use the T-shaped marketer or T-shaped professional as an example, where you have a little presence in everything, but there's one area where you go really deep. That's the recommendation that I have for social media and approaching these web channels as well, is find one channel that's your main and really own it, and have a meaningful presence, but still have a distributed presence so that you can keep an eye out and ears to the ground on any new signals that you may have missed.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. I have one last question here. This was posted before your session, you've already gone through a few of the trends, but how important will content writing be to video looking forward?
So, this is a very common question that I get as well, especially from the world of content writers and copywriters, who are wondering, well, in a world of video, what is the role of a writer? And there's a lot of angst and anxiety there. And I don't see it that way at all. I think good video is a ton of writing. If you look at any film, for example, you look at a movie, you might say, oh, a Marvel movie is just all visual and special effects. But no, all of that starts from a script, a very high quality script of dialogue that constructs the backbone of that story. So I think that's how content writing evolves. Content writing evolves into more of a script writing as we understand it today. Content writers are very well positioned to write these scripts and ensure that the video content that we publish is actually valuable and insightful. And everything starts with the written concepts. Even if the end point is a video, the starting point for any great film is also just the scripts on the back of a napkin. So that's how I would view it. I think the next generation, or the next evolution of content marketers and content writers, should evolve their skill beyond just expressing their key messages in the written word. It's about how to create compelling messages and then adapting them to tell those stories in a video formats. So that's how I would look at it. I don't at all see that content writing becomes obsolete. I think they're more important than ever before, because absent good content writing, videos can be very empty. And the worst thing than posting no video is posting a bad video that's actually a waste of everyone's time. So content writers are going to play that role of structuring the backbone of the stories that a brand tells, even though those stories are not going to be told in words as much as they used to.
Awesome. I have one last question. Is Snapchat dead?
So, one of the ways I always look at it is go where your competitors aren't. And so I don't think it's actually very useful to think about whether something is alive or dead. And that to some extent is true for the blog and search as well. As much as I'm saying that the blog and search is on a downtrend, what I'm really saying is don't assume that that's the only platform that matters. Depending on your audience, for example, let's say you're selling to a very specific demographic that doesn't have access to social networks, or doesn't have the income to own a smartphone, or whatever reason it may be. It's very plausible that there exists a demographic of people who use exclusively Snapchat. And if your audience is that audience, then Snapchat is certainly not dead. And how I would view fragmentation is really go where your competitors aren't. So that's where the blue ocean is. Red ocean is where there's blood in the waters and everyone is competing over saturation. But figure out where your core audience is spending their time, figure out where your competitors are spending their time, and opportunities are going to be where your consumers or your customers are and your competitors aren't. And for some of you, it's going to be Snapchat. For many of you, it may not be. But it's all about understanding who those people are and viewing that search is now just one portal into the web. I think before, search was the default, assumed everyone is on search. And to an extent, that's true, but not in the same way that it used to be. Our relationship with search has changed a lot, and it's a part of our day as opposed to the entirety of our internet experience. So that's my thoughts on Snapchat.
Thank you so much. And with that, it looks like our time is coming up soon. So Thank you so much, Michael, and thank you attendees for joining the session.